Looks like we've got the green light. I think we're ready. Okay. How's it? We have a full house, and it's so beautiful from this perspective to look at all of you. Thank you for joining me for Up Close with Maneo, the second one ever. I'm so excited. It is an honor that is difficult to encapsulate in a language as complicated as English. To sit across from Tsitsi Dangarembga, a deeply important literary figure in so many of our lives, I know. And I'm not going to gush too much because we have so much to get through. I also want to leave a good fat portion for question and answers, because I'm sure you have your own questions for our wonderful guest. I will start with biographies, even though I'm sure it's, what an introduction. Tsitsi Dangarembga is a novelist, playwright, cultural activist, and prize-winning filmmaker who studied psychology at the University of Zimbabwe. She obtained her MA in directing at the German Film and Television Academy in Berlin. She's known for her trilogy of novels set in her home country: Nervous Conditions, which was published in 1988, The Book of Not, which was published in 2006, and the 2020 Booker Prize nominated novel, This Mournable Body, which was published in 2018, and her collection of essays as well, Black and Female. Selected literary awards include the English Penn's Pinter Prize in 2021, the German Peace Prize in 2021, also the Yale University's Wyndham Campbell Prize, the Penn Catalan Free Voice Award, the Alison Clifford Spendlove Prize in Social Justice, Diplomacy and Tolerance, and she received the Doctor of Literature in 2025. In 2009, Dangarembga founded the Institute for Creative Arts of Progress in Africa, Trust in Harare in Zimbabwe. The NGO runs a diverse program of projects, including an international women's film festival, which we were just speaking about just now, and is currently fundraising for a 6-year Pan-African film development program, Creative Africa Storytelling for the Screen Incubator, or CASI. CASI's goal is to create a critical mass of globally competitive film practitioners in Africa in order to elevate Africa's capacity, earnings, and ownership in the growing global film economy. Tsitsi Dangarembga is currently developing a slate of long fiction films and is working on her next fiction and non-fiction books. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed guest.
Thank you, Maneo.
I'm glowing from nerves and also just honor, so I'm going to be vibrating throughout this entire conversation. As a way of structuring this chat, I thought that I would revisit this really beautiful paper that you wrote, writing as witnessing the Tambudzai and Nyasha trilogy, and it really sets the tone for these wonderful 3 books and this journey of selfhood and personhood that you take us through and you hold our hands through over so many years. You write, "How many more Tambudzais will there be in Zimbabwe before the nation begins to prosper in some measure? How many more Nyashas? The lack of progress and the degree of regression we experience on a daily basis are profoundly distressing." I wrote Nervous Conditions in the early 1980s, on the cusp of Zimbabwe's independence. My idea was to nudge young women towards attitudes that would increase their chances for success in the new Zimbabwe. You need to believe in yourself and your worth. You need to stand up for that belief, although that will be at some cost. You have to equip yourself with an education. In the Zimbabwean environment, help is too often expected from an external source. Your husband, your Baba Mkuru figure, at national level, your neighbor, bilateral institutions, China. Part of my project was to inform young women that they would have to do it for themselves. As Tambudzai did, that taking up the challenge of not waiting for help is the key that opens doors. In positioning your writing as a form of witnessing, I guess the first question is, what is it that you're inviting us to witness throughout this mammoth journey of becoming?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that question, Maneo. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Good morning, it's good afternoon now. And I hope we have a lovely discussion. Yes, that's a great question, and I think there are several sides to it. First of all, the word that some people may think is self-evident is not to me, and this is the word us. Who is the us that I was writing for? I was specifically writing for young Zimbabwean women who had grown up in a context like mine, and that was in Rhodesia, which was also a kind of apartheid state, as you probably know. And it seemed to me that nobody had taken the time to talk to them about themselves outside the context of the family, the extended family, with its traditions that were rooted in a bygone era. And my intention was not to diminish in any way those old practices, but it was important for me to say, look, the world is changing. And we have to change who we are as young women and who we think we can be and the ways that we interact and what we even expect of ourselves. And I thought that this would be possible with Zimbabwe having become independent. That expectation has not been fulfilled in a general manner in Zimbabwe. We still have an extremely elitist society. It is just that the criteria for membership of the elite group has changed from degree of melanation or lack of melanation to political membership.
Something else that you identify that's not just what you were writing for, but also writing against, is something that shows up in the paper as the paucity of happy endings in African literature. I'd really love to hear you speak a little bit more about that and how you decided to give these two intense Black girls a different ending inside of a maelstrom, I suppose, a whirlwind of unhappy endings for integrated characters.
Yes. Let me just sip some water while I think of an answer.
Yeah, for sure. While you're sipping, I wanted to also pick out something that was really beautiful that you said, that it seemed that to reproduce the trauma without a form of victory over it would embed the malaise and bring it more firmly into being.
Yes, well, endings were an issue. And after I wrote Nervous Conditions, I found myself in a difficult situation as a writer, specifically the kind of writer that I wanted to be, who had something relevant to say to society. It was difficult for me because I ended Nervous Conditions at the time of the liberation struggle in Zimbabwe, and here we were in the new Zimbabwe. So to continue Tambudzai's story would have been to go through the war, but we were all pretending it hadn't happened. And nobody was talking about it apart from really the programs that emerged from government, where school children were asked to write valorizing essays, and the best valorizing essay was awarded, but no one was actually engaging with it and analyzing what had happened, what it meant, and what needed to be done going forward, having had that kind of transition. So it took me a while to think about writing the next book. But then somebody said to me, Tsitsi, your character, Nyasha, is going to die. And by that time, I had read some of the African-American feminist literature, and I had really taken to heart the injunction that your first task is to stay alive. So I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I cannot let this character die. So here I was in this quandary. I have to continue, but it's difficult to write about the issues because maybe this is not the time. I have a character who's on the verge of death who I have to stop from dying. And it took me a while, and it was very difficult because the second book was then the middle, which wasn't the end anyway. But I had it in my mind that whatever happens by the end of this trilogy, those characters will have to be alive and will have to be flourishing. I mean, not exceptionally, but having lives that one feels one can build on. And that was really my aim.
It's so intense to experience all of the forces inside of the novel and to recognize them as someone embodied as black and femme, and so many of the experiences that Tambu and Nyasha move through are milestones in my own becoming, and it's sometimes too painful to touch. And these bitter battlegrounds, the boarding school, your first sort of space of employment, all of these incredible gauntlets that are almost forged to bring you closer and closer to social death. I thought it would be really beautiful, since we're getting close, to begin with some close reading. And there's no other way to enter into nervous conditions, at least to me, than by the intense and beautiful, arresting first sentence and first section. So if you could honor me and honor us with reading a little, and we can talk a little bit from there. I'll get that ready for you. Until the little purple marking for you.
Oh my goodness, over the page.
Yes, please. It was so difficult just to be like, oh, we have to stop somewhere. So, yeah.
Okay. I'm a bit rusty because I haven't been doing much reading, but I will try. I was not sorry when my brother died, nor am I apologizing for my callousness, as you may define it, my lack of feeling. For it is not that at all. I feel many things these days, much more than I was able to feel in the days when I was young and my brother died. And there are reasons for this, more than the mere consequence of age. Therefore, I shall not apologize, but begin by recalling the facts as I remember them that led up to my brother's death, the events that put me in a position to write this account. For though the event of my brother's passing and the events of my story cannot be separated, my story is not, after all, about death, but about my escape and Lucia's, about my mother's and my guru's entrapment, and about Nyasha's rebellion. Nyasha, far-minded and isolated, my uncle's daughter, whose rebellion may not in the end have been successful. I was 13 years old when my brother died. It happened in 1968. It was the end of term, and we were expecting him home by the afternoon bus that passed through our village at 3 o'clock. My brother went to school at the mission, where my uncle was headmaster, and which was some 20 miles away from the village to the west in the direction of Amtali town. Sometimes when my uncle was not too busy with reports and administration at the end of the school term, he was able to come away from his office at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, sacrificing the remaining hours in the day in order to bring Namo home. This was what Namo preferred. He did not like traveling by bus because, he said, it was too slow. Moreover, the women smelt of unhealthy reproductive odors. The children were inclined to relieve their upset bowels on the floor, and the men gave off strong aromas of productive labor. He did not like sharing the vehicle with various kinds of produce in suspicious stages of freshness, with frightened hens, with the occasional rich-smelling goat. We should have a bus, a special bus, he complained, like they have for students who live in Fort Victoria and in Salisbury, quite forgetting that these were towns, autonomous urban centers, whereas our home was in the communal lands that surround Amtali, and that since my uncle's mission was considered to be in Amtali, there was no need to hire a bus in order to ferry him and the other pupils who lived in our area home.
Thank you. Something that is already so striking from the moment that we enter into this novel is a sense of alienation and rejection, but it is so sensory that this rejection of smells and scents and sights, this idea that certain ways and frames of reality are reserved for certain people, and already, and from the title, which is drawn from Fanon, that this nervous condition of the native, of understanding, though not really being fully able to grasp a sense of the injustice, a sense of the subjugation, but that the nature of the rejection is self-rejection. I wanted to also read a tumble of questions from this paper that I think gets at the heart of the entire trilogy. You write, the trilogy provides an extended meditation on how colonial and post-colonial worlds affect the existential life of the colonized subjects. The aim I had in mind was to locate causation in the notion of the self. What should an African self look like? What can it do and not do, and why? What does it allow itself and not allow itself, and for what reason? Can we conceive of an optimal African self? I thought it was really interesting that you used a word like optimal when it feels so, for lack of a better word, like techie. It feels connected to the optimization that we're finding in the creation of the modern subject right now. So I'd like to ask, what do you mean by optimal, and do you feel that we're reaching, is there a sense in reaching for an optimal African self?
Lots to unpack in that, Maneo, so I'll go back to the beginning, and if I forget about optimization, please remind me. But what struck me about what you have just presented is the notion of being inside and outside at the same time. Inside yourself, but having to live in a world that exerts pressure on you to reject that insideness and occupy outsideness. And this is what I tried to get into the text. And using the young girl's voice was a tactic that I used, a strategy to help me to do that, because she is not yet aware. But by recounting what is actually happening, she can narrate this way in which we are put into a double consciousness situation where we have to reject ourselves in order to progress in the world at all. So that was very important for me. I believe that language belongs to all of us. And yes, I personally have an idea of what an optimal tsitsi would be. And I don't know whether other people have that, but having that idea about myself, I can look at, let's say, my neighborhood in Zimbabwe with all my neighbors in it, whoever they may be, and I can think about who optimal neighbors might be, who would create an optimal environment for me. So for me, that's a very personal thing, yes, and I do believe in optimizing my life as a human being in the context that I define being human. If other people define it in another way, that's fine, but that shouldn't allow them to rob us of certain words.
Absolutely. I really want to get into the battlegrounds. I think the Book of Not really, we find Tambu in the gauntlet of becoming, like in the real mess of it. And she's up against so much, but what I love about the prose of the Book of Not is it doesn't leave the body behind at all. And I have another section for you to read. So sorry, I'm putting you to work, Mom. This one's a little long. But from 70 to 72 and in the orange brackets.
All righty. Ntombi took an awfully long time in the bathroom. Growing nervous, I began to consider how nefariously Ntombi was scheming to ensure my lateness, so that I ended up in more trouble with the matron. Maybe Miss Plato would act on her word and report me to Sister Emmanuel. How angry I became with Ntombi. With an effort, although my impulse was to bang on the bathroom door while uttering insulting words, I managed to lay out my uniform calmly and picked balls of fluff off my socks. Then I started on my face, not because there were any spots, but to take my mind off the idea of another encounter with Miss Plato, or indeed with any other authority. I was just as worried about another encounter with myself. What if I did something else I didn't know I could do, like pull the sheets? What would it be, and wouldn't it be awful? Squash, Ntombi shot nastily when she finally came out from her washing, a towel around her waist. She darted laughing and triumphant glances towards the bed on which I had collapsed as I waited despondently for her to vacate the room I needed to enter as soon as possible. Hey, my classmates stood blocking my way to the washroom and enjoying the situation tremendously. Man, Miss Plato just flattened you. Hey, everybody, didn't Miss Plato squash Tambu? Grunts of agreement came from Irene and Patience. Swelled with the victory she had won over me, Ntombi proceeded to the cupboard we shared. This sharing of cupboards, the putting people in close proximity to each other, was a necessity arising from charity. As the dormitories on our corridor were built to accommodate a regulation for pupils, each room possessed 4 built-in units, but as the nuns' compassion towards us caused them to wish to educate as many of us as possible, there were now 6 of us at the Young Ladies' College of the Sacred Heart, housed in this 4-person room on St. Ignatius Corridor. This meant We first and second formers had to share cupboards. Ntombi remained immersed in the joy of my having been crushed. Didn't Miss Plato really show her? She turned to the other girls, a sanitary pad in hand. Those people who think they are a wonder, who think they can do whatever they want, fototo squash, just like that. There are people there who will show them. Patience and Irene granted again, much to my disappointment. They didn't want to look at me either, so I could see that by what I had done to Miss Plato, I had shamed the dormitory more than usual. So it was after this deflating or squashing beginning to the day for everyone that I stepped out onto our assembly area and looked about nervously. I could distinguish Linda Browning, the monitor, from the opposite table in the dining hall, shifting from one foot to the other at the back of the queue. And so I stood for a while considering, could a person stand behind Linda? She was known for her clumsiness, which meant she had little sense of the proximity of other persons. This lack of sense made her back into you without notice. If you backed away, you ran the risk of bumping into the girl behind you. There was something they, a particular kind of girl, did when that happened. This was a pulling back of their very aura from contact with you, in a way that said, not even your shadows that block the sun should intermingle. And looks of such horror flooded their faces at this accidental contact that you often looked around to see what horrendous monster caused the expression before you realized it was your own person. The girls put up with going to school with us because the nuns gave them a prestigious education. But this did not at all mean these particular white girls could bear the idea or the reality of touching us. Linda was not one of these. She was not easily dismayed by contact with us herself, but her clumsiness could force you into someone who couldn't bear it. I still think Cape Town's more fun than Durban. I see what you did there. Bougainvillea and Tracy swept by. You've only got the beach in Durban. Cape Town's got much more. In Cape Town, you've got culture. I watched them, sorry, now I have to go. You really should have warned me about this. I watched them carefully, sizing up who was where and estimating who would stand where in the form. Bougainvillea was the leader. Tracy would take her place behind Beau. Tracy didn't mind touching me. That meant even if she moved unexpectedly, I would not have to lurch to the rear. I sidled up behind her. It was now up to whoever stood behind me to decide whether she could risk contact or not.
Thank you. I wanted to select such a long, but also colorful, but also delicious section, because I think in this section, you really get the sense of the cruelties of young girls, and that this inside-outsideness and this double consciousness is so sharp in Tambu's body, that she's receiving so much cruelty from girls that look like her, but she's also receiving a kind of cruelty that is political and massive, the apartheid texture, this racial texture of the ways in which white girls recoil from her body. And I wanted to ask about that the small p, the intimate politic of race inside of the boarding school as a setting?
Yes, well, it was very important for me to situate the Book of Not in a girls' boarding school because I had dealt with gender dynamics in nervous conditions, and I wanted to look at race, or what I call melanation. I wanted to look at melanation in itself without conflating it with other demographics. So that was a perfect setting. I do think, though, that the dynamics within a girls' boarding school would be very different from within a boys' boarding school. And so I think it does show the different levels of attacks and aggressions that emanate from the environment that young girls like Tambudzai had to deal with. And I wanted to explicate that for them. This particular incident was inspired by something I observed while I was at school. One of the girls, one of the melanated girls, was asked by, it must have been a nun or somebody, to call one of the lesser melanated girls while we were in the line in assembly. And I could see this poor person just looking at this girl who was oblivious to the fact we were meant to be silent, so she couldn't call her name, looking at her and wondering what to do. You know, if I voice her name, I'll get a black mark and it'll probably be worse for me because of my melanation. And she put out her finger to touch her several times and brought it back and couldn't bring herself to touch this girl. In the end, she tugged at her sleeve so that she could make her aware physically without actually touching her. And I remember just standing and watching this whole transaction and just thinking, my goodness. And so decades later, when I needed to show what actually happens and how this actually impacts the person, I had recourse to that particular situation.
There's a kind of horror at the center of an interaction like that. And when I just think about the horror of being inside of a body that is swimming with hormones that kind of feel like they're all designed for your own self-revulsion as you're changing and transforming and shedding, and then to encounter oneself in one's body already in such a tumult of emotions and chemicals, and then to see that reflected in the world outside of you and the kind of psychic wounds that really imprint themselves onto someone. And it's something that you chart throughout this trilogy so beautifully, but so horrifically. But it's, as much as it's very uncomfortable to encounter, it's so important too.
Yes, I think so. In this book, I tried to show also the result of being placed in such a situation, in such a psychological and existential situation. So I really liked where you began with this, that Tambudzai is actually silently, passively aggressive towards the girls in her room. What do you do with all this negativity that you're surrounded by? You take it in, and it has to come out somewhere. And obviously, it's going to come out where one judges, one has an outlet, which will be to people who are evaluated by the context in the same way that you are evaluated. I often say that it puts us in a position where we predate against each other.
Deeply. You bring in a sense of Jungian psychology in this paper, which I really appreciate. It's nerdy, but really lovely. As a sort of way, I mean, Jung has been important for me just to encounter fiction on multiple levels and encounter myself on multiple levels too. And Carly Couture, you quote quote Kali Kutia's piece about this mournable body in this paper. You write, Kali Kutia discerns much meaning in a trunk that Tambu finds when she returns to the homestead in this mournable body. Kutia observes that this trunk contains the rotting mementos of her school career, the blazer, the academic certificates, the broken flip-flops she'd sent to her mother as a gift. The chest is a record of the onset of her fading, of her continuous and continued unmaking. The decaying contents of the trunk telescopes the many stages of Tambu's career into one elastic space, allowing her and the reader to catalogue the many dead ends, the many roads that led nowhere, the many doors that have shut. I found a section of this Mournable Body that sort of feels like the trunk of the trilogy. And I'd love you for the last thing for you to, for you to read it on page 82 until the orange bracket.
All right. Thank you. Right, so from the beginning of that. Up until there. All right. All right, just trying to locate myself and find out what's actually going on here.
Sure.
All right, I hope you'll be able to follow, but here goes. What happened? Your eyelids slither apart. The earth spins. You slit your eyes against a brilliant dawn. You are lying on the pavement at the bus stop. Looking down at you are two elderly men. They wear khaki suits and little caps, cooks on their way to work in the northern suburbs. Who knows with these ones? It could be anything, says one after a moment's reflection. Now what? What can be done? The other asks. With women, says the first, when it's like this, you know what it is. It's their ancestors tying them up. He straightens and his shadow lifts from over you. Love potion experts, these are the ones busy rotting their husbands' guts and killing them one after the other. Don't touch her, otherwise you'll be in for something. Absolute witches. Sweat, paraffin, and a long lack of washing. The smell rolls over you. I said, don't touch her. She'll take what should be yours and it won't come back to you. The odor recedes. Do you see anyone touching anything, says the man who was warned to leave you alone. There is rustling. Ah, what's this? Wasting money, says the first speaker. Since she is here, not yet dead, says the other, I'll say it's not wasting. A 50-cent coin is pressed into your palm. You drift away as footsteps recede. Later, you open your eyes again and lean over to vomit. The mess fills the cracks in the pavement. Ants and tiny spiders scurry around in indignation. You heave yourself up, clutching the 50-cent piece, the evening's booty. Ants and spiders trek over your body. Regiments of them defy the city's low pressure in the widow's shower. You are thinking as you attack both them and your skin with your washcloth. I am the kind of person 2 cooks give a coin to. No, I am not that person. I am not. Would I know it if I am that person? When you were young and in fighting spirit, growing mealie cobs in the family field and selling them to raise money for your school fees, you were not this person that you have become. When and how did it happen? When you were among the brightest, in spite of running kilometers to school and studying beside a sooty candle. No, it couldn't have been then either. nor was it in the days that followed at middle school at your uncle's mission, where you remained focused on a better life and so continued to excel. This leaves only your secondary school, the Young Ladies' College of the Sacred Heart. It must have been there that your metamorphosis took place. Yet how awful it is to admit that closeness to white people at the convent had ruined your heart, had caused your womb from which you reproduced yourself before you gave birth to anything else to shrink between your hip bones. You give up the struggle against your knowledge and concede at last a fiendish truth that you first encountered at the university. In an interview, a Ghanaian writer called Ama Ata Aidu declared at first she had not known she was the color she eventually learned she was, that the term black held no meaning for her until she found herself among white people. You laughed then as you read it, thinking, oh, as though they dip you in paint. Now the ants crawling over you as frenzied as ever in the drizzle of tepid water from the clogged up showerhead, you know much better. The Ghanaian woman's story calls to mind that aspect of your cousin Nyasha that you had disliked but were obliged to endure when you shared a room with her at the mission. There was frequently something dismissive, close to sneering, yet at the same time hinting at hurt in her words when she spoke about white people. It frightened you in those days to hear how hostile your cousin was towards the Europeans. Now, laboring to define the onset of your fading, the notion of one group of people disparaging another so malignantly once more dismays you.
Thank you. That section really does feel like the trunk of the whole trilogy. Mm-hmm. This nadir, this bottom point in Tambu's consciousness and her journey, where as frequently as heartbreak brings us into a kind of consciousness where we're rocketed into a sort of linear understanding of our lives. Like, how did I get here? Can you speak a little bit about this particular moment?
Yes, well, I personally don't feel that this is like Tambudzai's low point. She goes much lower than that, for those of you who haven't read the book. But it was really important for me to get down to the dregs. So I wrote this book not that long ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, would have taken some time to actually finish it. So this was after the land program in Zimbabwe and things had begun to go awry. And I could see that there was this propensity to always point the figure away to somebody else, even amongst the general population. It was always the government's fault. And we cannot do anything. We cannot engage at all. And I wanted to show, my intention was to show people that it's up to us. And we have to understand who we are, how we are unable to conceive of an agency that's practical and goal-directed and can get us somewhere. And I needed to paint a picture of someone who abandons agency psychologically, and what happens when you abandon the concept of agency, which is why Tambudzai has to go through all the horrors that she has to go through. But then to put this in a societal and a historical context, no group of people stands up and says, oh, today we're going to abandon agency. This is something that happens. Agency is intentionally sucked out of people in order to create beings who are fit for purpose, whatever that purpose is. We talked about optimization, and yes, we are all now being optimized as consumers or whatever. This optimization means developing technologies that keep us stuck to screens. Our brains are dumbed down. Even by its own brain functioning, these screens are designed to interact with us in such a way. So it's happening now on a global scale. But there had been trial runs with different technologies beforehand. And so I was trying to point to the fact that this is what has happened to people like the societies in Zimbabwe today, and using Tambudzai to show that. So this is why it feels like the trunk of the whole trilogy, because the whole trilogy is about those existential crises that develop when two different groups of people with opposite intentions and also with predatory, extractive intentions, one upon the other group meet. And as I said in the beginning, this has not substantially changed in Zimbabwe. It's just the demographics of the predator have changed.
I'd love to open it up to all of you gorgeous people, because I'm sure you have tons of questions, and we have really wonderful ushers, so please raise your hand so that they can see you and get to you. And we already have little pops. That's so lovely. We have one here in the front, and that will take us home.
Hi.
Yes. Yes. Oh, sorry, yeah.
I didn't think I would be the first.
Hi, and please be succinct with your questions. I will cut you, as Luando Scott likes to say.
Okay. I wrote it down, so don't
Lovely,
show off,
I'm proud of you.
So, you're literally, Nervous Conditions has gained global recognition and had enabled you to travel globally. Now, globalization poses a threat to the acquisition of African languages, and I see your travel somewhat symbolic to Namu's travel locally. When he had to leave and had to come back from school, he lost his language skills to speak in Shona. So my question is, how do you keep rooted in your native language? And at any point in your life, have you ever felt somewhat close proximity to where Namu was linguistically?
Okay, thank you. I think I got the first part of that, but not the final part.
I think the final part was asking about how do you, if you do retain your relationship to your own native tongue?
Yes, I definitely do. It's very difficult. We live in a situation where everybody is exposed to social media, and the common language, especially for people in countries that were colonized by the English, is English. So everybody is consuming the kind of English that appears on social media. And this is really worrying because I don't think the vocabulary is very great. And so it means that people's vocabularies are shrinking, and with that, their minds are also shrinking. But it also means that when people interact, they will speak half a sentence in maybe Chishona. I've noticed this very much with the people of my language group, which is Chishona. And so the language competence is disappearing now at every level. The interesting thing is that there was a result of the grade 7, which is the pre-secondary school exam a couple of years ago, and it showed that Shona competence was much lower than Ndebele competence. In Matabeleland, people had a pass rate that was over 50. But in the Shona-speaking areas, it was much lower than that. So there is an onslaught, and something that I have seen is that there are no efforts by government to uphold local languages. The local languages will be used in certain formal settings. For example, the news, there will be news in the different languages on the national broadcaster. And you will find that local languages are used at rallies. But outside that, there is very little development of the local language. Now, I don't know how conscious that is, but it is something that I see happening. So for me, it's really important to keep up my use of the language when I can. I'm not at home all that often because of marginalization in my homeland, so I have to travel to find work and this kind of thing. So it is actually a big problem, but my father in particular was very, very consistent in making sure that we developed our language skills, and that is something I try to keep up. Although I find that, like, in the extended family WhatsApp group, I'm the only person writing in Shishona.
We have another question over here. Hi.
So my question is kind of in continuation to the discussion that we've had around the body, and particular your use of the body within the three novels, in conversation with seeing the body as the site of the struggle or the site in which the nervous condition exists in, but also as an object or a tool where in its action or inaction, it goes to reject the particular systems which it exists in and is kind of oppressed under.
Okay, sorry, please can you just repeat the end so I understand what the question is a bit better?
So the last part is around kind of talking about your use of the body in itself within the three novels, and around particularly using the body as a site of struggle and as well as a site of resistance within the three novels.
Okay, well, this was...
I think I'm going to grab another question
Okay.
also so that we can fold it in.
All right.
Because we're running out of time. I see there's someone else. If we have another question, go ahead.
Thank you so much for that. So my question is looking through a lens of Black consciousness, and sort of because said that, you know, the thing is, Black man, you are on your own. And I hear you speak about the importance for young Black women, young Black Zimbabwean women to do it for themselves, to own their responsibility. But one thing that's interesting for me is the engagements of the subject and the question of the agency. We touched on social death, but we didn't really get into it, considering that the sociogeny has taken place and that has, you know, left us Black people bereft of a lot of the things that are corollary of being a subject, choice, concern of the libidinal economy and these things. So I guess my question is, how do we view the agency, or how do we construct the subject in this sort of environment where it sort of predicates on our death? And another question is why the preference of less melanated and more melanated as opposed to Black? Thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that. About the body, for me, the body was the obvious site to locate the story. The body is a context, it's a metaphor for a site of struggle, because it was said to be the body that rendered us less. And so it is this body that has to come to the realization mentally and effectively that, in fact, as a unit, I am not less. So for me, it was very clear that that's what I had to do. Also because it encompasses several demographics: age, gender, melanation, etc. To answer your question about melanation, did I get that correctly, that you were asking me why I use melanation? Yes, it's because the word Black is so loaded, and the axis of Black to white is also a loaded axis. Melanation is purely physiological. You know, it's how much melanin do you have, and you may have less and you may have more. So for me, it seems to be a more neutral term. I also have growing concerns with the way that black is used as a term of erasure. Melanin could also come to that point, but at the moment, if you look up, or for me, especially in film studies, if I look up black, I'm looking up diaspora, and so Africa is being erased again. So those are two reasons why I thought a new term was necessary. And I think for me, if we are looking at purely physiological issues that have to do with matter, geography is also something that has to do with something that is material. On which soil do you stand? So it makes more sense to use those kinds of descriptives, those kinds of adjectives that are in the same class. And then the in-between question was?
In the face of social death.
Yes, this is really interesting. For me, it says that the subject is always there. So it's a question of how do you recall the subject? If the subject has decayed, how do you revive the subject? And this is what we do when we come together. We talk about it. We acknowledge the traumas that we have been through. We strategize for our healing, and we chart the way forward. So I am of the opinion that we sometimes subscribe to the illusion that the subject is dead. The subject cannot be dead so long as the person is there, because it is in fact the subject that is occupying a psychological space that is outside self. It's the subject that has decided, I need to do this. So it should be possible to bring that subject back to the self.
With that, I thank you all for joining me, and I thank you so much, Tsitsi, for being here. I cannot thank you enough. It's been such an engaging, thick, delicious conversation, and I really hope that the rest of your time in Cape Town is beautiful. Thank you for being here, everyone. Enjoy the festival.
Thank you, Maneo. Thank you.